Thank you so much. Pleasure to share some words of Torah today. So I wanted to talk about this idea of matzah Ashira, but specifically through the angle of how the mitzvah that Hashem gave us of guarding matzahs, of being careful that matzahs don't become chametz, the mitzvah that's given to us, shmartim misamatzos, specifically the overlap between that mitzvah of shmiro, shmartim misamatzos, and the relationship that it has with the sugya of matzah Ashira. So the first Makom that I want to look at, the first idea is the Gemara on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph in Pesachim. The Gemara on Daf Lamed Hey in Pesachim tells us that there are certain types of grains that can be used to make matzah, and there are certain types of grains which are ineligible to make matzah. Not every grain can one make matzah out of. Now, some of these ideas are quite intuitive to us because, we see the chameshes minei dagan all over the place in halacha. We see a lot of times in halacha that it's only the 5 special types of grains: the wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye, which a person can make bread out of. We take that for granted. But the source is actually from this sugya in Pesachim Daf Lamed Hey of matzah, and we'll see how we get to that. So assume we know nothing. The Torah just is saying we have lechamoni. Well, what's lechamoni? What is matzah? I mean, maybe it can be made from any grain in the world. Maybe rice bread is also considered. A person makes some matzah from wraps, it is chayiv and challah, and so on and so forth. All the various nafkaminas which a person can come to in halacha, trying to figure out if these things are considered bread. Maybe they all are. How do we know what is bread and what is not? What is the source that only, again, wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye? How do we know that those are the only grains which make bread? So the Gemara tells us that the source is because there are 2 laws which are taught to us together in the Torah. The Torah says, "Lo sochal olav chametz shivas yamim."
Rabbi Geringer, if you don't mind, Rabbi Geringer, again, if you can hear me, you can look down on the chat. If you don't mind, I sent you a note. Your bandwidth is a little bit low, so you may freeze every once in a while. And also, I sent you a note on the chat. If it freezes, we'll let you know. Okay, I'm not sure why the bandwidth is low. Whatever. Okay.
What else?
Maybe you may get closer to the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So at any rate, so we have this idea in the Gemara that the 5 species, the five special types of grain are able to make matzah. None of the other alternative types of grains like rice or millet, for example, those are ineligible to make matzah. And the Gemara is trying to figure out what the source is for that. How do we know that we exclude something like rice or millet from becoming matzah? So the Gemara tells us that the source is that there are 2 laws that the Torah says next to each other. The Torah says do not eat chametz. There's an isser, a prohibition of eating chametz. And the Torah also says a mitzvah of eating matzah. It says for shivas yamim, for 7 days, matzahs tochilu, we are commanded to eat matzah. So why is the Torah telling us not to eat a chametz right next to the halacha that we have a mitzvah to eat matzah? So the Torah is telling us the dinim because there's a connection between them. There's a deep connection. The connection the Gemara uses is that matzah can only be made from a material which is susceptible to becoming chametz. Something which is dangerous, something which could potentially become chametz if it would be left out, if it would leaven properly. That is a type of material that I instead guard and quickly put into the oven. And by doing that, I make sure that it turns into matzah. That's a fulfillment of the mitzvah of matzah. But if I have something which is not possible for this type of item to become chametz, well, then that type of item cannot become matzah at all. And the Gemara says that the mitzias, the reality, just what exists empirically in the world, is that rice and millet do not properly leaven. If you leave them out, they will spoil before they will turn into chametz. So because of that, it's impossible for them to become chametz. If it's impossible for them to become chametz, they won't leaven properly. So then the law that matzah must be connected to chametz, only something which has the potential to become chametz is possible then to be turned into matzah. That halacha, that law will teach us that if a person makes matzah from a material like rice or millet, it will not be considered matzah, it will not be kosher. That is what the Gemara on Daf Lamed Hey tells us. And then the truth is that that's really the first thing that we need to know in the sugya of understanding what bread is. Once I get to that point that matzah cannot be made from rice or millet, and it's only from the 5 grains which leaven properly, then all the other dominoes start falling. All the chips fall, and we get to the other areas of halacha, for example, that anytime where it says lechem is only something that's made from those 5 grains. So to just give us the background, that's the point where we are. The Torah says that we're meant to eat bread. It's called lechem oni. That's the way the Torah refers to matzah. How do we know what makes up lechem? How do we know? Maybe any grain can be made and produced into lechem. How do we know that it's only from the 5 special grains? The answer is because in the context of Pesach, the Torah says, do not eat Pesach, do not eat chametz right next to the mitzvah of eating matzah. And those two halachos are connected, and they're connected in the sense that we say that matzah can only be made from something which is susceptible to becoming chametz. That's the first key here. And already at this point, we see a deep connection between the two halachos. We need the element of danger. And although, the Torah says, Ushmartem es hamatzos, there's this idea of guarding them, we can already start seeing this idea that comes from the Gemara, that's part of the process of making matzah. It's not just that because the danger exists, so from a practical level, a person's supposed to be careful. It's something a little bit more. The idea is that that's part of the process itself. The way that a person makes matzah is by going into the lion's den, so to speak, by dealing with the danger, by having those items which are susceptible to the leavening process, and by dealing with them correctly, by guarding them and putting them into the oven quickly, making them into matzah. That is the correct way of doing the mitzvah. But if I take something which never had that potential to become chametz, well, then in that regard, that thing is simply incapable for becoming matzah at all. Okay. Now, if it were just really for this Gemara, it wouldn't be so pronounced because, a person can just write off this Gemara and say, well, all the Gemara really means is that it's an identifying to us the min, the species, the types of grain that one can make matzah out of. But really what's going on is the Gemara is just telling you, like what bread has to be from the 5 grains. It's not telling you something so fundamental in the laws of matzah that matzah has to have the danger of becoming chametz. That's not really the key takeaway. Maybe somebody can dismiss this Gemara and say, really the point here is something else. Really the point is just that only these types of the 5 grains can become bread. And this is just the way that the Eibishter conveyed it to us. This is just the place where we see it from in the Torah. But the halacha isn't based on the idea that we want the danger. It's hardly that we want the danger. It's rather another issue. It's rather just that these 5 grains are the things that can make bread. Perhaps somebody can be a bit dismissive just from looking at this Gemara itself. But as we go along today, we'll see that there's more here to explore. And as we explore more, I think we will see this idea building that it's actually part and parcel of what matzah is. Matzah is something that's had the danger and susceptibility to chametz, and yet still was carefully turned away. It was still carefully turned into matzah. So the next Gemara that I want to look at, which I think is a little bit more pronounced, is the Gemara on Daf Mem in Pesach. And the Gemara in Pesach Daf Mem is talking about a process called lisisa. Lisisa that they used to do is they would soak the kernels. This is again, when you take after you harvest the wheat or barley or whatever one of the grains that you're using, before you grind them, before you do anything to the grains themselves, there used to be a process of soaking them. And soaking them was good. It would benefit the quality of the flour which was produced. And if I'm soaking them, what I'm doing is I'm exposing them to water before the kernels are even ground. So I don't even have the flour yet. That's not what I have. I just want to soak them in the water prior to grinding them, but prior to the tahina, and then obviously before it's mixed with the becoming a dough in any way. It is simply the step number 1, the first step of soaking the kernels before they are ground. So on a regular day, when a person is baking bread, and they want to produce a higher quality of bread, that's what is recommended. That's what a baker would tell you to do. He would recommend doing lisisa to soak the kernels before grinding them, because then the quality would be higher when they were ground. Matzah on Pesach. And the reason why the Gemara is trying to figure out is because on the one hand, the quality of the matzah will be higher. We'll probably do such a thing because you're exposing it at an earlier time in the process to water. And that already hastens, that accelerates the leavening process, because by exposing it to water, now it's already the possible it's going to become chametz. It's accelerating the process. So maybe it's wise not to do lisisa, because if I don't do lisisa, then I'm slowing it down. I'm not exposing it to water until it's already flour, it's already been ground. And at that point, then quickly, the first time it's exposed to water is right when I'm making it into dough, and less time will be involved before I get it to the oven. That is the complexity of that the Gemara is dealing with on Daf Mem. to do lasisa or not to do lasisa. On the one hand, the quality of the bread will be better. On the other hand, it's dangerous. It's susceptible more before. So the Gemara has different opinions. At first, the Gemara in Daf Mem, the Gemara cites a brisa, which talks about barley. And the Gemara says that with barley, it is better not to. In Losis in Sa'orin Pesach, it is better not to, because it's possible that it will accelerate the leavening and it will become chametz. So we prefer seeing that like that. And the Gemara talks about, the Gemara goes on to say that perhaps if it was done, there are different ways that a person can check head on the kernels, and we can tell whether or not it's dangerous to use it or not. Eventually, Rabbah even says the expression that a baal nefesh lo yilsa. So according to Rabbah, it's not like it's forbidden. It's not something which is strictly forbidden, but it's a baal nefesh. Someone who's a little bit stricter, more of a chassid, a person should not do such a thing. It's recommended not to. And the Gemara explains that Rabbah was talking specifically, Rabbah was talking about wheat. Barley was actually asur, because with barley, when I soak the grains, it makes it very susceptible to becoming chametz quickly. But with wheat, it's a little bit slower. And with wheat, it might not be as strictly forbidden, but perhaps it's still not recommended. A baal nefesh, someone who is a bit more chassidic, should not do such a thing. That's originally what the Gemara tries to do. Then the Gemara actually mentions, in Rava's view, to the contrary, that perhaps we should be stricter with wheat than we are with barley, because there's actually little holes. There's actually little holes that are in the wheat, little clefts in the kernels of the wheat. And what would happen is that if a person were to use if a person were to expose those kernels to the water, it might actually get into the kernels themselves, and that's a dangerous thing. So Rava actually recommends that not doing such a thing. He actually says it should be strictly forbidden. So these are just a bunch of details here. I know this is obviously, most of us are not that well versed in the technicalities of lasisa, trying to figure out if we should soak our grains, not soak our grains. It is recommended, it's forbidden. A baal nefesh shouldn't do it, barley, wheat, all the different variables. But that's all the background to what the next steps of the Gemara are. The Gemara then comes along and says, Hadar Amar Rava. Rava then switches his mind. He says, Hadar Amar Rava, mutter lilsos. In Rava's view, it is actually permitted. Until now, we've been saying do not do it because it's too dangerous. Then Rava comes along and he says it's permitted. And he brings a proof. The Tanya, it says in a brayso, Yosin bapas nekiyav v'hadra, that matzah, a person can fulfill their chiyuv not only with coarse types of flour, but even if it's very fine flour. The efsher nekiya below lasisa. Says Rava, they're never going to have pas nekiya unless they did lasisa first. It's just is impossible. Inevitably, the brisa must be referring to someone who is permitted. And at this point, the understanding of why it's permissible to soak the grains is that a person can be careful. Yes, of course, we can see that the science is that it's more dangerous. We can see that it's not something that's easy. We understand all of that, but we trust the person enough, and we say, you know what, go for it and go have your higher quality of matzah. Everything will be good. Everything will be safe. Everything will be okay. That is what Rava then switched his mind to. So again, as long as it's wheat, we're not concerned that the water is going to get into the little clefts of the kernels. Well, we would be okay with a person doing it. That is Rava's conclusion at that point. Then Rava said something even further. At this point, Rava is just saying it is permissible. If a person would like, they are allowed to do sisa. But then Rava comes along and he makes a further point. Hadar Amar Rava. Then Rava changed his mind yet again. So we see Rava is really going from extreme to extreme. At first, Rava has said it is absolutely forbidden to do lasisa with wheat kernels. The water will seep in there into the cleft. It will inevitably become chametz. Not a good idea. Then Rava says it's permitted. A person could. And now Rava, in the further extreme, is actually saying not only is it allowed, it's actually supposed to be done. Rava then switches his mind. Mitzvah, so it is a mitzvah for a person, or perhaps more precise, how do we know that it's a mitzvah for a person to do lasisa? Shene'emar, Rava cites the pasuk, Ushmartem es hamatzos. Hashem gave us a mitzvah to guard the matzah. Hashem told us to be careful when we're making and manufacturing matzah, a mitzvah of shmira, that we should be careful to guard it and make sure that it doesn't become chametz. Says Rava, ilo debai l'sisa, if not for the fact that the production required l'sisa, shimor lamai. What would I have to be so careful with? What would I have to be so careful with? If it just means shimor from the lisha and on, after I put in water when I'm kneading the dough, shimor delisha lav shimorhu. That point of shmira is already a little bit too late in the game. If the first time I'm going to expose the bread and make the dough and knead the dough, at that point, that's too late to me mekayim the mitzvah of shmira. That's too late in the process to say, hey, I'm guarding it from now and on from becoming chametz, and from then and on, oh, I'm guarding it, and that will be mekayim the mitzvah of shmira. How do we know that's too late? It's too late to Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna taught us, if a person received dough from a non-Jew, and obviously the non-Jew is unable to fulfill the mitzvah of shmira because he's a non-Jew, he can't think the correct things, he can't guard it properly, he can't have the right lishma when he's manufacturing matzah, but he made me dough, and the dough that he made, I'm able to tell is not chametz, but at the same time, it's not been guarded up until this point properly from becoming chametz. So what is the halacha? A person is allowed to use dough. A person is allowed to do that. Put it into the oven and bake it and eat it on Pesach. A person's allowed to, meaning we're not concerned that it's chametz. We can look at the dough and be very confident that it didn't turn into chametz. Everything's okay. However, it's not considered matzah shmura, because since the guy was the one who manufactured it and brought it to dough, it's not considered matzah shmura because it was made by a guy. A guy is unable to give that status of matzah shmura. His intent, his thought is not there. So therefore, if I, the Jew, would like to eat it, I may. It's not forbidden for me to eat it, but I have to make sure that I fulfill my mitzvah of matzah. And my mitzvah of matzah is only fulfilled if I eat matzah shmura. So I could eat it on the Seder night, but make sure to eat a matzah, at least a kazai's worth of matzah that is shmura at the end. Okay, what is the reason this is true? Because this type of dough that I got from the guy, it's not chametz, but it's not matzah shmura. So now we analyze this idea. Why is it not matzah shmura? I cannot rely on this from my mitzvah's matzah that I'm fulfilling my chiyuv with. It's not considered to be matzah shmura. My time, why not? The only reason has to be because shmira was not done. The guy was incapable of doing shmira, and I receive it only at the point where it's already dough. So shmira hasn't been done. Well, we have a very practical solution to that problem, says the Gemara. Why can't the person stick it into the oven with shmira? Meaning, from the time that I'm baking it and on, I'll do shmira. If shmira is simply something which can be injected at any point during the process, then who cares that it was already dough by the guy and I only get it after it's become dough? Let me bake it with shmira. I'll bake it with shmira with the right intents, ala machshavos, so on and so forth, and that will stamp and label that the matzah is being made lishma. What do we see from here? Why is it not possible? Elalav shma mina. You know what we take away from this halacha from Rav Huna? Elalav shma mina. Our takeaway is shimor meikara ba'inan. That shmira is not simply something which can be placed into the process at any point. That does not suffice for a person to do any one of the steps of producing matzah lishma. That's not enough. Shmira is meant to be an absolute constant role within the process. And the entire time, it is meant to be produced with the right ideas of lishma. That is what Rava is saying. So if it's meant to be produced the entire time, lishma, so that's why if I got the dough already from the guy, so there was no shmira that was done until that point, if I'm going to put it into the oven and think lishma, that's not going to suffice. Because what about until then? There was no shimur meikara. So what the Gemara was grappling with is, how do we understand dushmartim etzamatzos? Somebody could have said, it just means that at some point, a shmira was done lishma, and at that point, it labels the matzah as matzah shmura. It doesn't have to be constantly done throughout the process. And what we're proving from the law of Rav Huna that a person can't take dough produced from a guy and put it in the oven lishma is that that's not the truth. It's not the truth. To the contrary, matzah shmura means that the entire time shimur meikara beinan throughout the entire process, it is produced from the entire time. It is being produced with shmira. Wonderful. Now, what does Rava want with that? Rava is coming along and saying, well, if that's true, that I need to be making the entire steps, all the steps in the way, it has to be done with shmira. How am I doing shmira before I put the water in and make the dough? There are many steps that happen before that, even before I actually go ahead and make the dough. I harvest, and then I'm going to grind it, and only later do I go ahead and put the water in. But if the only first time I'm putting in the water is when I'm making the dough, how did I fulfill shmira beforehand? There was nothing to guard. I can't guard something that has no danger. That's the key here in Rava's point. Rava is bringing a proof that water must be added before you even grind it, already in the state when it's still kernels. It must be that there's already water then, so that there's a state of danger at that point. There is proof that it's in a dangerous state, because if there was not, then there would be no way for me to do the mitzvah of shmira. And once we prove that shmira is supposed to be constant, shmira is supposed to be something throughout the entire process, well, the only way that shmira could be done in the onset, in the beginning of the initial stages of the process, would be if the kernels were wet. So that proves to us that there must be a mitzvah. An actual good recommended thing to do is to make the kernels wet from the outset. So let's just make a recap of what Rava's point was. Initially, the Gemara thought that lasisa is something which is forbidden. It's forbidden because it's too dangerous. We're nervous it's going to become chametz. Don't do it. Don't put in water. Don't mix water until you're actually making the dough. Rava then said it was permissible, and then Rava is saying even more extreme. Actually, there's a mitzvah to do lasisa. It's recommended that a person does it. The source that it's recommended is the fact that Hashem gave us a mitzvah to guard the matzah, and we prove from the halacha of Rav Huna that the mitzvah of shmira is not simply something which can be injected at any arbitrary point during the process, but rather that shmira is something that's a constant part and parcel of the entire making of the matzah. And we're stuck with a problem. How in the world are you going to do shmira throughout the entire process if it hasn't become wet and the initial stages of the process? If the first time it's dangerous is first when I'm making dough, then how is it throughout the entire time? So on that shows that it must be that there is a mitzvah to do lasisa, and because there is a mitzvah to do lasisa, therefore Rava is now telling us that's the correct thing to do. There's a mitzvah to soak the grains before, and that's how we now understand how the shmira will happen the entire time. That is the point that Rava makes. Now, we have to figure out, and this is where the kind of like a fork in the road now occurs in the Rishonim, is Rava has shown us a source that there is a mitzvah to do lasisa. We know that the fact is true, that it's recommended that lasisa is done, because if not, then there wouldn't be such a great shmira which would occur. So there's a proof that seems that it happens. But the question is, what is the nature of the mitzvah to do lasisa? Not how do I know that lasisa should be done? That's not the question, but rather, why should lasisa be done? What is better about a matzah that had lasisa done to it than a matzah that didn't have lasisa done to it? That's the question that we would like to know. So let's explore this just a little bit from the next line in the Gemara here, a couple lines down. The Gemara says that Rava told people who were flipping the matzah, the grains, when they were still establishing, when they were still working with the grains and the kernels, he said to them, when you are working with the grains and the kernels, you should be careful to flip them over l'shum mitzvah, meaning you're guarding them now. What are you guarding them from? Evidently, you're guarding them for making sure that nothing wet would fall onto them. That's what you're guarding them for. The Gemara emphasizes this point again, that Rava is of the opinion that shimur should be done from the beginning stage till the end. So actually, it emerges in the end of the Gemara that there's a way to guard the matzah, to guard the grains throughout the entire time, even without lasisa. Because at the end, we see that there's this concept of just when you're flipping the grains, you want to just make sure nothing foreign like falls on them, nothing from the outside happens. There actually kind of is something to guard them from during the time before they are even ground. Now, this line in the Gemara brings Tosfos to a very simple question. Once we realize in the end of Rava that there actually is something to guard it from, even if I wouldn't do lasisa, I could guard it from some foreign something falling on them. Tosfos writes on the bottom, Tosfos on Mem Amud Aleph, if there's an idea that I have to guard it, even when I am simply flipping the grains, how did Rava have a proof that there's a mitzvah to do lasisa? Maybe there's no mitzvah to do lasisa, but I could still fulfill the mitzvah of doing shmira the entire time because I just watch out that nothing foreign happens to it. So that's an interesting point here. What we're saying here, what Tosfos is challenging is that who said Rava's hechrich, Rava's force, Rava's idea that what was compelling to do lasisa is really so compelling? What was Rava's source that we have to do lasisa? The source to do lasisa is because if there's nothing, if it's not going to be wet, if I don't soak the kernels, then what exactly am I guarding from? But what we see later is that evidently that's not true. Even before I soak kernels in the water and the water is going into the clefts of the kernel, but there's still what to guard from. Rava told the people, even when they're flipping the grains themselves, that there's what to guard from. I guess you're guarding to make sure that no foreign substance falls onto the grains. So evidently we see there is what to guard from the entire time. So who said Rava even had such a good proof to begin with that lasisa was so necessary? So it very much appears from the question of Tosfos that all Rava wanted was a source. All Rava saw, well, that mitzvah of lasisa was a source that a person must do lasisa, and the source was because if not, how am I going to do shmira? It was basically, I know I must do shmira because Hashem said do shmira, and the understanding of shmira is the whole time. But how am I going to do it if not for the fact that lasisa is done? So says Rava, wait, must be that there's shmira to do. Oh, must be that there's lasisa. So then Tosfos gets very nervous. How do I know that's true? Why is that a hechrich? If I see Rava telling the people who are even flipping the grains that they should be doing shmira, then evidently there's what to be shown from even without lasisa. So that kind of the proof that Rava gives. So we see from Tosfos a very important thing, that all Rava really wanted was a hechrich, something which showed us that you should do lasisa. But Rava didn't explain us why lasisa should be done. If all he showed us was a hechrich, the idea that if not, what is shmira going to be done from, then perhaps we can refute the hechrich and say that the shmira could in fact be done when they're flipping the grain, and maybe the shmira is to make sure that no outside substance would fall onto it. This idea that is also very pronounced in the Tosfos HaRash. In the Tosfos HaRash, he also explores what is the nature here of doing lasisa, and he also understands, like Tosfos, that the whole point of Rava was only that there should be a hechrich, some sort of something compelling us, something showing us that there should be lasisa that is done, and it was just that Rava was saying it must be that lasisa is done because if not, there is nothing to guard it from. And he comes along, Hadar Marava Mitzvah Lilsos, and he tells us why there is a lasisa. Let's take a look at what he writes. Pirish or mitzvah. The reason lasisa is recommended is that it beautifies the mitzvah. Why is it beautiful? Kidei lecho pas nikia. It's better to do lasisa because it's better to eat matzah, which tastes better. Better to eat matzah, which was from a higher quality of flour. And Rava said the source was ushmartim esamatzos. That was just Rava proving to you that there is a mitzvah to do lasisa. But the nature of the mitzvah, according to Tosfos and the Tosfos HaRash, is not because I want to do better shmira. The nature of the mitzvah of lasisa is that I want to eat a higher quality of flour. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be eating flour of the higher quality. It's hiddur mitzvah. What type of matzah do you eat? You don't eat matzah that tastes bad. You eat matzah that tastes good. It's the idea of hiddur mitzvah. That's the reason why there's a mitzvah lilsos. How do we know that? What is a force? What forces us to see it that way? Because we know Hashem Shem Ushmartim is a matzah. And Ushmartim is a matzah has to be that it's wet. Must be there's a mitzvah to make it wet. But the only reason we are making it wet, according to Tosfos and the Tosfos HaRash, I believe, is simply to have a higher quality to the matzah that we are eating. So according to these ideas, the Baalei HaTosfos, the mitzvah of lasisa is to bring us with a hechrich, with something forcing us to see that. He's telling us matzos is the whole time, and if it wouldn't be that it was wet, what am I guarding it from? That shows us that it is wet. And again, that's why Tosfos is struggling so much. Once Rava said that I even have to flip the sheaves to do it lishma, we see that maybe there was another things you could have done lishma. So how do I know that I'm supposed to really do lasisa? That is the point that Tosfos was struggling. Okay, now let's contrast the approach of the Baalei Tosfos with the approach of other Rishonim. We have on the other side of the fork of the road here, we have the Maram Chalava, we have Rabbeinu David, and we have the Chiddushei Haran, who all explain a very different idea to us about the nature of the mitzvah of Lasisa. The nature of the mitzvah of Lasisa, according to the other sides of the Rishonim, are something very different. You see it there, they quoted there in the footnote for you, that the idea is something very different. The Rishonim
let's put up the Rabbeinu David, Mordechai.
Rabbeinu David here comes to explain what Rava was saying. Rava said there is a mitzvah to do lasisa because shmira should be done the whole time, and if there's no lasisa, what am I guarding from? Says Rabbeinu David, Klomar, what he means to say, if Hashem has commanded us that we have to be guarding the mitzvahs l'shem matzah, yesh b'mashma, it is implied, sheyasa b'hem, a person should do. A person should be doing every possible thing that is normal to do, which would require shimor, vizuhi lasisa, and that would include soaking the kernels. Why? Why am I soaking them? Kidei sheyekayim ba kol shimor harago liosbo, to be mekayim shmira in the highest possible level that I can. And this is the idea where it is so different than the Tosfos Harash. According to the Tosfos Harash, all Rava was doing was giving us a source, but not explaining the nature of the mitzvah. According to Rabbeinu David, Rava is explaining to us the why as well. The nature of why I should do lasisa, the reason behind it, is because the greater the danger, the greater the shmira. If Hashem said, Ushmartem esamatzos, Hashem wants there to be more danger there. Because the more danger that there's going to be, the better shmira there will be. If I don't do lasisa, and the first time that the grains are ever, being exposed to water is only when they're turned into flour and the dough is being produced. So yeah, it's true, I'll have some shmira. I'll have to guard it at that point and on. But I didn't have so much shmira. I didn't have so much danger to begin with. But if I'll do lasisa and I'll expose the grains to water at an earlier point, well then I'm going to have to be a lot more proactive as I watch these grains and be careful that they don't become chametz, and therefore that is all included in the ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and what he was saying to us, v'nushmartem es hamatzos. So it's really interesting how the Gemara, if you take Rabbeinu David's approach, it's so interesting to see how Rava vacillates here on Daf Mem. Initially, Rava says, lasisa, that's too dangerous. You can't do lasisa. You do lasisa, it's extremely dangerous. It's too risky. If you're playing with fire, because if you're going to do lasisa, maybe it's going to become chametz. We don't want you to do that. Then Rava says, you know what? I'll let it be. It's permissible to do it. Then Rava says, no. I want the danger. I welcome the danger. That's a better matzah. The better the danger, the better the matzah. Ushmartem es matzah, shmira meikara throughout the entire process. Do everything you would regularly do. Go for it. Don't withhold. Don't say I'm being frum by making sure that there's less danger, so I'm guaranteed that there's no chametz. To the contrary, the more you're denying its susceptibility to chametz, the weakening that it is more that you are weakening the matzah, because the matzah is matzah shmura. The more you guard it, the better the quality of the matzah will be. So according to the Rabbeinu David, it's not about the quality of the matzah being from fine grain. Lasisa is not being done according to him or mitzvah in order to have a better taste of the matzah. That's not really the point. According to Rabbeinu David, Maram Chalav and Chiddushei Haran, the idea is that it's a better matzah shmura. That's the idea which seems to emerge from their comments. And again, conceptually, you would definitely relate that back to the Gemara on Daf Lamed Hey, which was discussing why you should not be using rice or millet because they're not susceptible to becoming chametz. And the idea would be is that if it's not susceptible to the danger of becoming chametz, that's not matzah. So there, Gemara was saying it in the minim, in the species. If it's not possible for it to become chametz, that just can't become matzah at all. Now we're saying it even on a deeper level, even if we're talking about the right things. I want to know how dangerous should it be? We're seeing that there's actually a mitzvah to put it into the danger at an earlier state so that we can go ahead and quickly then run and put it into the oven. Okay. At this point, let's shift over a little bit. We're going to go back and look at matzah ashira on daf lamed vav. So matzah ashira, what is this idea of matzah ashira? So the first thing actually we're going to look at is a statement that Rish Lakish makes on daf lamed hey. On daf lamed hey, Rish Lakish tells us that there is a prohibition. Let's just move back. Lamed hey. Here we go. Itza isa shenilosa b'yayin v'shemenu devash. If a person kneads the dough, instead of just using water, person kneads the dough with other sorts of juices. So, for example, he puts in wine, he puts in oil, he puts in honey. The halacha Reish Lakish says is ein chayavin al chimutza kares. One is not chayav kares for eating that. So what's going on? Why is that true? Why is it that a person is not chayav kares if they eat dough which leavens, but it leavened together with other fruit juices? Why is that true? Why not? I mean, it seems to be that it can become chametz. One would expect it to be. So why not? Why is this idea that chametz, you're only chayav kares if you eat it and it only was mixed with water? But if it was mixed together with other substances, we say you're not chayav al chimutza kares. Why is that true? So eventually, on the bottom line of Lamed Hey Amid Aleph, the very, very bottom line, after the Gemara moves away other possibilities, the Gemara says, Mishum Dahavi Mei Peros, because these things are Mei Peros, they're considered fruit juices. Top of Lamed Hey Amid Beis, the Gemara tells us a scientific fact, Umei Peros Ein Machmitzim. The rule is, just scientifically, that they do not leaven properly. Mei Peros Ein Machmitzim. So therefore, Reish Lakish is really telling us, first of all, mostly a scientific fact. We shouldn't be overthinking the novelty here of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is telling us that if you're going to be putting in the wine into the dough, then ein machmitzin, it's not going to properly become chametz, and therefore you would not be chayav kares if you eat it. This is the idea that Reish Lakish tells us. Now, there's a tremendous split in the Rishonim here in the Metzias, exactly. But I want to focus on the Metzias, which Tosfos assumes, and the Ramban, Balamar, many Rishonim do assume, although I will preface, it's important to know that Rashi does not agree with them. But these opinions in the Rishonim hold that if I only, when you're making dough, you need to have the flour and some liquid. So these Rishonim hold that if I would only have, the only liquid that would be there would be mei peros. For example, you mix flour with honey, and that's it, then it would not leaven whatsoever. It simply wouldn't leaven whatsoever, wouldn't leaven at all. This is the idea that the Rishonim tell us. Whereas if I do it, go ahead and I put in water as well, so I have water and fruit juice and the flour, in that case, it actually is able to leaven. So this is an important kind of Metzias here that is important just to establish that I'm going to be working with. Again, this is not unanimously accepted by all Rishonim, but I want to work with that Metzias now, just for clarity's sakes, as we progress. If I have no other liquid besides just this mei peros, it will not be machmetz at all. But what will happen is that if I put in water and also other stuff, then it will machmetz. It will become chametz on some level. So now, once we know this rule, let's take a look at a Gemara on Daf Lamed Vav. The Gemara on Lamed Vav Amid Aleph is talking about the term in the Torah called lechem oni. I'll just wait for it to come up. Okay, thank you so much. So the Gemara tells us that the word lechem oni is a strange word. What exactly does oni mean? So the Gemara tells us, in the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, lechem oni. Why does it say oni? So oni means as if we read it oni, as if it's read not affliction but poor bread, as if ignoring the vav. Read it like oni. Prat, this includes li'isa shenilosha b'yayin b'shemen udavash. This excludes dough which was made, it was kneaded with wine, oil, or honey. This is what the Gemara tells us. This is the term called matzah ashira, rich man's matzah. What does it mean, rich man's matzah? Rich man's matzah means that it was kneaded with other foreign substances, and since it was kneaded with all these other foreign substances, the wine and the oil or the honey, so then it's called more like what a rich man would do. A poor man, he doesn't have anything to add to the batter. He doesn't have anything. He just simply has, the only thing that he has possible is his flour and his water. So matzah's got to be absolutely simple, just flour and water. The second you're mixing other things in, the Torah is saying that is not called lechem oni. Okay, wonderful. That's the drasha here that is given to us. Then the Gemara continues on, and it tells us. And now let me just at this point already interject. We don't know what type of matzah the Gemara is referring to. It could be that the Gemara is referring to a case where I put in water and also, in addition, mixed in yain v'shemen. It's also possible that the Gemara was talking also in a case where there was only yain and shemen or davash. The Gemara doesn't really tell us. The words of the Gemara itself, it just says it was nilosha yain v'shemen udavash. The Gemara doesn't tell us. The Gemara doesn't tell us whether or not you have any water that is mixed in. The Gemara does not identify for us. It definitely should probably be including as well a case where there's yain v'shemen, but it does not explicitly tell this to us in the text here. So then the Gemara comes along later, and the Gemara has a question for us. The Gemara has a question: is it really true that Rabbi Akiva says, or Savar Rabbi Akiva, that you can't use for matzah if you have the other foreign substances mixed in? And the Gemara tells us that there's actually a machlokas in the Tanah. Tanya says the pricing there's an idea that a person shouldn't mix other substances into the batter. And the idea why you shouldn't do it is because if it's Pesach and you're mixing it in, actually it may accelerate the process. So obviously here the Gemara is talking that there is water as well. I have water as well, so it could definitely become chametz. And in addition, when you put in the wine, it may hasten it. I know this is a little bit confusing because if I just have water, what's the mitzvah? It's in machmitzin. It doesn't leaven. But if I put in water and also I put in yan shem mash, these tanam are actually super concerned that it's going to become chametz too quickly. You're not going to be able to put it in the oven fast enough. So the Gemara is saying better not to do such a thing at all. However, Rabbi Akiva says, no, I was one time on a Pesach by Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, and I did it in front of them. I made some matzah in front of them that had some water and wine, and they didn't say anything. They were very, very okay with me doing that. So Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that you could make matzah that has water and wine in it. So the Gemara is actually asking us Asira, what is going on? Am I allowed to have matzah ashira or not? Before Rabbi Akiva said lechem oni, says I can't use matzah ashira. Here we see Rabbi Akiva is totally fine with having. So eventually the Gemara answers difficult. It depends whether it's the first day or the second day. And the point the Gemara is making is that the law of lechem oni is only on the first night of Pesach. Because in order to be Yotze at the Seder, the Torah says I need to have lechem oni. So at the Seder, I better make sure that there's no wine which was added into the dough. But on Yontif Sheni, it's not. All I have to make sure that I'm not eating chametz. So if all I have to make sure is that I'm not eating chametz, so who cares that it's not rich man's bread? Who cares that it's not poor man's bread? Who cares that it's matzah ashira? That's not doesn't matter to us because the bottom line is that it's not chametz, and according to Rabbi Akiva, everything is okay. So to summarize Rabbi Akiva's position, Rabbi Akiva holds that a person is quite confident that even if they put in wine into the dough, they don't have to be concerned that it could become chametz. He was quite comfortable doing it. Other Tanoim were nervous. Rabbi Akiva was comfortable that it won't become chametz, and he did it sometimes in front of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. No one said anything to him. However, Rabbi Akiva is darshaning that for Seder night, when the Torah identifies that the matzah to be yotze with has to be lechem oni, there the halacha is that a person has to be careful that they do not put in the other substances into the dough. That is, until this point, what the Gemara is telling us. Then the Gemara adds, Kidda Amar le Rabbi Yeshua libnei. This is just like Rabbi Yeshua said to his son, Yom HaKamalo Talishu Chava. Please do not make me matzah from the first day of Pesach. Do not put milk. Mikan va'elach. But after the first day, no problem. Put milk into the dough. And the Gemara seems to be saying this is the same idea. On the first day, when we need lechem oni, so then milk is unacceptable. But for the rest of the days where we don't need lechem oni, then milk is acceptable. So now, here's where the fireworks all start. This is a statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, which we should assume is the bottom line halach. We don't find anyone disputing this. Whatever Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said will be the halach. Now, before in the Brisa, we had many Tanaim who were not that comfortable if you're making matzah on Pesach and you're adding water, they're not comfortable adding other substances because they're scared it's going to become chametz. Rabbi Akiva was okay with it. Is this statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi a proof that he held like Rabbi Akiva? So the Rif says, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what's going on. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi held like Rabbi Akiva, and he's totally comfortable putting water and, again, provided that on the first night we don't do that. We don't want to do that on the first night because it's not lechem only. But the rest of the days of Pesach, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was quite comfortable telling his son to do that. Everything is great. And therefore, the Rif says that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. We see that. So on the rest of the days of Pesach, if somebody wants to go ahead and put in water, both water and other meiperos into their dough, go for it. It's l'chatchila. A person is allowed to do such a thing. This is the opinion of the Rif. The Baal Mar says no, it's not true. Actually, it's very dangerous to put in water and other fruit juices into the dough on the rest of Pesach. A person is not allowed to do that. All Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was telling his sons was to put in just milk, only milk. And then it's meiperos and machmitzim. That's allowed. He was saying on the first night, just to put in milk, that's not allowed will not be lechem oni. That would be rich man's bread. But the rest of the days of Pesach, if you only want to put in milk, go for it, because then we will not concerned it's going to be chametz. However, if a person wants to put in water and milk, we're concerned it's going to be too accelerated of a chametz process, and a person should not do such a thing. So to summarize, we have a dispute between the Rif and the Baal Mar. According to the Rif, we see from the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that the halacha is a person is allowed to make matzah during the rest of Pesach with water and meiperos. We paskin like Rabbi Akiva that is not forbidden, except for the first night, because on the first night that would not be lechem only. According to the Baal Mar, a person is not allowed the rest of the days of Pesach to put in water and milk into the dough. We're concerned it would become chametz. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was only saying you're allowed to mix only milk with the flour during the rest of the days of Pesach, and he was still telling his sons, don't do that on the first night, because that would not be lechem only. That is the dispute between the Baal Mar and the Rif. The Mochamas Hashem, the Ramban, comes to defend the opinion of the Rif. And what the Mochamas was very upset about, in the opinion of the Baal Mar, is that it came out, according to the Baal Mar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was telling his son, on Seder night, don't make matzah that is mixed only with milk. Don't take flour and mix it only with milk and make the matzah. Don't do that, because that won't be lechem only. And Reb Mochamas Hashem says there was absolutely zero reason Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi would have to tell that to his son. There is zero novelty involved in that at all. And in fact, you don't even need the drasha of lechem oni to tell us that you're not yotzei the mitzvah of matzah if you only mix in a fruit juice into the flour. Why is that true? Says the Mochamas Hashem, I have two tainas against it. First taina is, remember the Gemara said you can't use rice grain to make matzah? What was the reason you can't? Because if it's not susceptible to becoming chametz, then it can't be matzah. Only something which is potentially has the ability to become chametz, only that can become matzah. So if you're only going to use milk, then we know from Reish Lakish, meiperos and machmitzim. If you only use meiperos and there's no water mixed in, there's no potential for it to become chametz. If there's no potential for it to become chametz, then of course that's not matzah. Not because God said lechem oni versus lechem matzah ashira, because it's pashut that's not matzah. That's not matzah because it's not susceptible to becoming chametz. That's one time that the Mochamas Hashem says. So again, it's taken out of the species thing. It's not only about rice and millet. Now we're seeing even within grains. If you're going to mix grains with milk in a way that will inhibit the leavening process, it just won't happen. Well, then that's not matzah according to the Mochamas Hashem. You don't even need the drush of lechem oni for that. Clearly, the drush of lechem oni was only necessary for the case where there was water inside and also milk, in which case it could become chametz, and still we're not supposed to do that because it's not lechem oni. That is point number one that the Mochamas Hashem makes. Point number two is that he says, remember that mitzvah, shmartem es hamatzos? Hashem said you have to guard the matzah. If somebody is going to go ahead and put milk, and again, only milk, and mix it with the flour, there's no possibility of it becoming chametz. If there's no possibility of it becoming chametz, then how did you fulfill the mitzvah of shmirah? The mitzvah of shmirah means guard. If there's no danger, then I can't guard it. So the Mochamas says that's a further indication that if somebody mixes flour and meiperos without any water, where it cannot become chametz, it's obvious that matzah they're not yotze with, not because of the drush of lechamoni, because of something much simpler. They're not yotze because they didn't do shmira. There was no way for them to do shmira. Now, the reason why this is such a chiddush is because when I remember first hearing about this Muhammad, I thought to myself, I said, that's probably the best shmira out there in the world. If I come along and I put some foreign substance into the flour, which will forever inhibit it from becoming chametz, that's the most proactive, smartest way to ensure that something won't become chametz. Shouldn't that be the best shmira out there in the world? And what we see from the Ramban is to the contrary. The best shmira in the world is when you're in the lion's den, when you're in the moment of danger, when things are very susceptible to becoming chametz. And yet you go ahead and you make sure you quickly accelerate and you put it in the oven and you make sure that doesn't happen. When the danger is there, that is when it's going to become shmur. That's when it's going to come down. So that's why the Muhammad says it must be that the whole story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi and the Drush of Lechamoni was talking about when there was also water that was there, so it was possible for it to become chametz. So then it was susceptible to it, and I can do a fine shmira on it. But if it was just that it was mixed with other fruit juices and there was no water there, it wouldn't be a chefsa of matzah at all, and it also would not be mishtameres. Those two chidushim of the Ramban are very, very much in sync with the track of the Rishonim and Daf Mem, the Rabbeinu David, the Ram Chalava, and the Chidushi Aran, which we saw, which emphasized the better the danger, the better the shmira. This is the idea which seems to emerge in their opinions. I want to spend just the last few minutes here. Unfortunately, we don't have more time to get into some of the more interesting halachos which are emerged from this, but I want to spend about just a few minutes just elaborating on how powerful of idea this is for us on a hashkafic perspective going into Pesach. Usually, our machshava, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin, is that we daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to test us. We daven every single day. Loli dini soyon. We don't want to be tested by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara tells us that David HaMelech wanted to be tested. He wanted to attain the level of being like Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov. Hashem said they were tested. You were not tested. David requested to be tested, and he fell. He fell and he sinned with Bathsheba. So the Gemara tells us that the takeaway from that is a person should not request to be tested. It's not necessarily that we're expressing our insecurity in how good we are. That's not necessarily the point. The point is that our deepest devotion and connection, what the Yiras Chit dictates, is that the further I stay away from sin, the better. I don't want to be tested. I don't want to even be close to sin. Even going down the road where potentially I could sin, that is a problem unto itself. That's generally the hashkafa that we look at. And if you look at the concept of matzah, and you see that matzah is the good that is emerging from a potential of danger. It shows us how clearly something so different, which takes place with matzah. Some matzah somehow, not only is it better that we get, is it better for us to get to the danger? The more the danger, the better the shmira, the better the quality. You need the susceptibility to become chametz, as we saw, and we even saw more so from the Rishonim, that the greater the danger, actually it's a better, it's a hiddur in the shemira that we're having. So what in the world is going on? Why would matzah be an embodiment of a concept that there's better good that comes out from a greater risk or greater reward? Why is matzah so different? So we see a very famous Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that it is forbidden for a person to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. And the example that is given, the illustration, to understand what it's like is kabol arusav beis chamev. It's the idea that a person has done erusin, he's betrothed to a woman, but he hasn't yet consummated his marriage. And the idea is that he's jumping the gun, he's having biyah before nisuin. So the idea is the matzah in this metaphor, the matzah is where it's as if, it's the bride and we can't wait and we're building excitement to go ahead and consummate our relationship with the matzah. We produced it, we processed it, we've begun the stages, but we haven't eaten it. And we are waiting until nightfall to eat it. If somebody would eat matzah before, then they prematurely are missing the point, and it's kabol arusav beis chamev. And it's such a unique halacha. You don't find a halacha on Erev Sukkot that you can't pick up a lulav because it's kabol arusav beis chamev. There's no such halacha. It's something that's so unique to matzah. So again, there seems to be the special emphasis of love, of being so close to the love. What is the idea that is behind it? So the idea perhaps can be explained that when we left Mitzrayim, as we know, we were not on the highest of levels. We weren't deserving, we didn't merit it. And it was what had to happen was chipazon. Chipazon, a moment of haste where we were rushed out of Mitzrayim. And the concept of that is to be infatuated with love of the Ribono Shel Olam. We hear a lot in the world today about infatuation versus love. There's true love And then there's infatuation, where you're not really in love, but you think you really want something. And the concept of infatuation versus love is exactly what Klal Yisrael were working with in the Chipazon of Mitzrayim. We didn't really have the love yet. We didn't have enough to be in a loving relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that point. But Lech Lech Achar and Arutza, the concept of running after the Rebbeinu Shalom and the young forming relationship that we had, at that point, we were infatuated with the power, with the potential. And the reason why the infatuation is so powerful in a way greater than love is because love builds on what exists and infatuation builds on imagination of what can still come to be. We were infatuated with the Ribono Shel Olam. When you're infatuated, you do crazy things. You run out in a quick way, in a moment, in a spontaneous way. We ran out of Mitzrayim. And we deal with danger to show us that most of the times we say, don't go down the engine. Don't be even have yichud. You have yichud with a woman you're not supposed to be with. Who knows what's going to happen? You've been married for so long, so on and so forth. You have a long relationship with a person that you love and trust and care for. No, you don't go down that road. But the one time where the Ribono Shel Olam shows us we should trust ourselves and be confident is when we're making matzah. When we go ahead and make matzah, the point of it is that we're saying, Ribono Shel Olam, is that we're so excited. The passion is so there for the future. We're so excited about what's going to happen. Nothing's going to distract us. We're on our way down to the chuppah. We're b'yom chasunaso. And on the day that we're going ahead and marching out of Mitzrayim, we are so focused, so laser focused in on what we're trying to accomplish that no danger in the world removes us on our mission. There's no danger in front of us. What seems dangerous is actually not dangerous. We're calm, we're cool, we're collected. It's Erev Pesach, but we're singing Hallel as we're baking matzah. As we walk into the lion's den and invite the danger and the Yetzer Hara, we say, Yetzer Hara, come into my territory. I welcome you. I'm not afraid of you. I know the Ribono Shel Olam. I'm singing to the Ribono Shel Olam my Hallel as I'm baking my matzah on Erev Pesach. I'm fully calm and collected in this process as I am doing that. And it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's way of showing us, yes, you're infatuated. The love process is beginning. We can do so many things. So the idea of Gebola Rusasa is so pronounced to matzah. Matzah is the object of love. It shows us that we're doing something. It's real. It's not just a chefsa shel mitzvah, but it's something much deeper, much more metaphoric as we're looking at. It's the power of infatuation. And every single idea of Pesach, it's like the 30 days before. So there's Teshuvah Meira that we do during Elul, the 30 days before Yom Adin and Rosh Hashanah. And then we have the 30 days before Pesach. The idea of the world is recreated in love. The love is the way the world is created in Nisan. We know the Ribono Shel Olam has the machshava, but there's the machshava and the din. There's the idea of what Hashem wants to do and the way the world pragmatically exists. So that idea is now represented in the idea that the world is a creation of the world, and Ahava is the days of Pesach. It's the days of Ahava, it's the day of love. To grasp onto love means that we're able to do crazy things that we would only do if we were infatuated with the Ribono Shel Olam. And that is the idea of Pesach, why we're welcoming the desires of the Yetzer Hara, why we look at it in the face and we say we're not scared. The rest of the mahalach of the year is lowly de nisayon. We don't want it. But now we say actually the better, the more the danger, the greater the reward, the better the matzah. And when we eat that matzah, we look at it like a deeper connection, a consummation of the relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. And we're based upon this, that this is our perspectives as we go into Pesach. No matter where we're holding, no matter where we've been the past year. But now it doesn't make a difference. There's an opportunity, we take it and we grab with it. We run b'chipazon out of Mitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the ability to do that. We should be zeichet, to chai kosher v'sameach. We should enjoy it and feel the simcha, the ahava together with the Ribono Shel Olam. Thank you so much.